Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this Timewise webinar on ending the two-tier workforce. I'm Amy Butterworth. I'm Consultancy Director at Timewise. And for any of you on the call who don't know us, Timewise is a social business with a mission to create healthy, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. And we do that by widening access to good quality, flexible work. This webinar is the final one in a series of 3, exploring the current state of flexible and secure employment in the UK and looking at how employers can really step up to provide good jobs across everyday sectors of the economy, including retail, construction, health and care, transport and logistics. And this work is being completed as part of Timewise's Industry Voices programme, which has been funded for us by the Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust. I'm joined today by a fantastic panel of speakers, and I'll introduce them shortly. But first, I wanted to share some insights from our Industry Voices programme and introduce the topics that we're going to be talking about today. A bit of housekeeping: if you do have any questions for the panel as we're going through, please pop them in the Q&A window. We will have a little bit of time to try and answer those. And also feel free, if you'd like to add any comments or thoughts in the chat, and there'll be some of the Timewise team monitoring that as we go. So let me tell you a bit about the programme. Over the last 12 months, Timewise has been bringing together industry leaders, employers and workers from the 4 frontline sectors that I mentioned earlier: retail, transport, health and social care and construction. And we focused with these groups on understanding how to improve access to good quality, flexible work for frontline and site-based workers in each of these sectors, particularly those on lower incomes. We've obviously been doing this work in the context of the UK's new Labour government and their new Employment Rights Bill, which, as many of you will know, contains legislation which is aiming to increase the flexible working rights and the right to predictable hours of work for millions of workers. So why is this important? Lorna, if I can have my slides, that would be great. Thank you. So in the UK, there are just under a third of all our workers, 10.5 million people, are frontline workers. The work that we've done at Timewise has found that many people in this group are missing out on the input and control that come with predictable, flexible and secure jobs. So whilst many of us will follow the debate that rages on about hybrid working and the number of days in the office and seems to dominate the headlines in many newspapers, this is meaningless for 2 in 5 workers who do their work entirely on site. So whether that's in a shop, a hospital, a warehouse, a building site, many of these workers are also shift-based and have little to no say in their patterns of work. So that's thinking about place. If we also think about time-based flexibility, we've found that since 2019, 1.3 million more people in desk-based jobs gained access to flexible hours working. In the same time period, the number of shift-based workers with access to flexible hours saw no growth at all. So you can see this is painting a picture of 2 tiers within our workforce. Workers in frontline, shift-based, lower paid roles at a clear disadvantage in terms of working arrangements and input and control compared to their desk-based colleagues. But it doesn't have to be this way. There will always be roles that need to be delivered on site. There will absolutely always be shifts that have to be worked in order to cover a service. But by giving these workers more input into and control over their own working patterns, and by increasing the security of their working arrangements, employers can take steps to improve job satisfaction and the health and well-being of their team members. Our research has found that it is possible to close this gap between frontline and office-based workers, but that there are challenges in doing so. In the report that we've produced through this programme, we point to 3 key barriers: constraints due to operational complexity and lack of capacity within frontline employer organisations. And this can really limit the ability of employers and organisations to innovate and to try new working practices. A lack of coordinated collective action at sector level relating to working arrangements. So again, that can mean that employers don't necessarily have the influence or the drive or the understanding of what's possible within the roles that they have within their organisations, and it can make it harder to make change. And then finally, resistance to cultural and management change, resistance to the changes in leadership which are needed to really make a difference to workers. Through this programme, we spoke to workers in lower income roles in these sectors, and they told us that organisational culture and the behaviour and role modelling of their managers was what really made a difference between the espoused policy of their organisation and the reality for them working on the ground. On the more positive side, through this work, we have also found examples of excellent practice, embedding flexible and secure work into frontline, low-paid sectors. But it's fair to say that these are not the norm. Insights from this programme of work have suggested 3 ways that we can mainstream these pockets of good practice into more predictable and flexible working cultures across industries. Key starting point is to shift people's perceptions and build understanding of what flexible and predictable work actually looks like in these frontline site-based roles. Testing and trialling new practice and sharing learning, gathering data, collecting evidence of impact from pilots and trials can help to challenge existing poor practice and show what's possible. And finally, making flex as default the expectation within cultures and systems. So this does mean looking at systems around recruitment, around the way work is organised and jobs are designed, around management approaches, but that will really drive the cultural change and shift expectations in terms of flexibility and stability being available to all. There's much more detail in our report, which also contains recommendations for government to go beyond the legislative proposals in their Employment Rights Bill and create practical partnerships with industry to support them to take these actions and speed up the rate of change. Many of you will know the government last month has commissioned Charlie Mayfield to look at how government and business can work together to support people into work and to raise living standards. And so we feel that our recommendations, which also support this aim, are well timed. As well as the report, we've published 4 sector guides, which offer sector-specific recommendations on how to improve access to secure and flexible work for frontline employees. So for those of you who work for employers, please do have a look at these. The full report and sector guide link is in the chat. So in today's webinar, we're particularly focusing on frontline lower income roles in health, construction and transport. However, the challenges and the learnings that our panel will share, I'm sure will resonate with people in the audience working in other site-based, shift-based frontline environments. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by our fantastic panel of speakers, all of whom have participated in the Industry Voices programme and contributed to the findings and recommendations. So if I can welcome Kevin Green, who's the Chief People Officer at First Bus, Hannah Carter, Senior Programme Manager at NHS Employers, Daljit Kalirai, Interim Chief Executive for Women in Transport, and Nicola Pease, who is a member of the Timewise team and leads our work on construction. Thank you so much for being part of our webinar this morning. To start, can I ask each of you to provide a short introduction to yourself and your organisation? And I'll come to you, Kevin, first.
Okay, my name's Kevin Green. As Amy said, I'm the Chief People Officer at First Bus. We are part of a FTSE 250 listed business. We have 18,000 staff. The vast majority of those, 13,000 are bus drivers and about 3,000 are engineers. So, you know, we're right in the sweet spot in relation to the work that Amy has talked about. I also chaired the transport group when we were looking at it from a sectorial perspective. So I suppose just to give you some of the challenges, you know, attrition was a major problem. Attracting people to become bus drivers has been a challenge. So the Great Resignation, it cost us £8,500 to train a bus driver. So not being able to attract people and not being able to retain people is a critical business issue, let alone a people issue. And we've been going through a major transformation where we've been trying to move our business from being a legacy, all about the bus and the asset, and timetables, which were the other obsession of our business, into something which is much more interested in being a service business and more about customer and people. So big transformational agenda, but some real challenges in relation to how do we create a much more flexible, dynamic workforce, which we can attract and then retain so that we can deliver the mileage and be a profitable business.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for joining today. Hannah, I'll come to you next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you today. So like Amy said, my name's Hannah and I'm the Senior Programme Officer for Staff Experience at NHS Employers. Some of you may have heard of NHS Employers, some of you may not, but in a nutshell, NHS Employers is the employers organisation for the NHS in England. We support workforce leaders and represent employers and systems to develop a sustainable workforce and be the best employers they can be. So we have practical resources and we provide expert insight help to make sure to make sense of current and emerging healthcare issues. We like to keep employers up to date with the latest thinking and ensure that they are informed and equipped to support the NHS workforce. My particular programme of work is commissioned by the Department for Health and Social Care, and I look at how staff experience impacts on the retention of our valued workforce and supports improved patient care. So that includes flexible working, freedom to speak up, and health and wellbeing as well.
Right, thank you, Hannah. And we've popped a link in the chat to the resources page. So for any of you who work in healthcare who haven't seen that, and actually any of you in other industries might be interested to take a look at the work there that NHS employers have been doing, and we'll talk about it a bit later. Thank you. Dal, can I come to you next?
Yes. Hello, good morning everyone, and thank you for having me as well. I'm Kalirai. I am the Interim CEO of Women in Transport, who are a not-for-profit organisation who help women within the transport sector reach their full potential, develop and progress, and help attract more women into the sector. I've worked in transport for over 30 years, largely in the bus industry. I left National Express in 2023 and set up my own business helping local authorities with bus reform. As we all know, the transport sector attracts one of the lowest percentages of women in the workforce at 26%. Now, Women in Transport celebrate their 20th anniversary this year. So in 20 years, that percentage has barely moved, and we need to do something different to make the industry more attractive to women and underrepresented groups. It's well understood as well that both men and women want a better work-life balance, and navigating care responsibilities and other duties that they have. The long shift patterns that are present within the bus and transport sector are obviously not acceptable working practices for the large population these days. So the industry needs to modernise, and back to Kevin's point, for us to thrive and not have the challenges and be a more resilient sector, we need to look at different ways of working and different practices so that it's more of an inclusive place for all types of employees across the workforce. Thank you.
Thanks, Dal. Great to have you here this morning. And last but not least, Nicola.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm Nicola Pease. I'm a lead principal consultant at Timewise. And I lead our work in construction. So I have worked with over a dozen construction organisations in the last 3 or 4 years, helping them to really unpick some of those challenges. And what was interesting, Dal, is there's a lot of parallels, I think, in terms of the demographics. So I see your 26% and raise you to it's 16% of the construction workforce are women. And that, again, hasn't really changed much in the last 20 years. And it's a long hours culture. It's a very physical working environment, particularly on site. And what we see is that it's really ingrained. The long hours culture is just the way we do it. It's expected of people. And what we're seeing as a consequence is that difficulty in recruiting and retaining people, but we're also seeing problems from a wellbeing perspective. So it's one of the industries with the biggest number of lost sickness absence days across the UK. And it also has consequences for health and safety on site as well, where you've got workers who are feeling fatigued and physically tired, mentally tired, and therefore it's causing problems and they're having more accidents and incidents on site.
Thank you, Nicola. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being part of the Industry Voices programme, for your contributions in the panels and to the report and recommendations, and looking forward to continuing the conversation this morning. So we know that there are specific challenges presented by the complex services and skills required within transport, health and construction. As many of you have said in your introductions, these are sectors where much of the work has to be delivered on site and often over extended service hours. Many frontline staff in these organisations work shifts, and employers are often relying on these same staff to also pick up overtime shifts when demand is high, and to cover vacancies and absence, which, as Nicola and Dal, you have both said, are quite high in these sectors. These are also sectors which often rely on very rigid planning and scheduling of work. And so that, together with the interdependency of roles and the skills mix needed, does add further complexity. And I guess this paints a picture which shows us that creative approaches are needed to provide flexibility and to give workers input into and predictability over their working patterns. So our research has found that when flexibility is approached on an individual basis, so where it's arranged for one employee with their manager, there are always going to be limits to that. And in some cases, that can actually prevent other employees from accessing flexible ways of working. And a challenge that we've identified, which you'll find more about in the report, with the current employment legislative framework and the forthcoming changes, is that they still require an individual to request a change to their hours or working patterns. And they're not encouraging employers from a legislative perspective to proactively consider security or flexibility as part of the way they design their service or design their work. However, through this research, we have explored how it is possible to move away from that individual request response approach, and how some organisations are taking team-based and more proactive approaches to improve worker experience, well-being and productivity. And that's where I want to start this morning. So I'm going to come first to Kevin and Nicola to share examples of some of these proactive approaches being taken for roles that are site-based and shift-based. Kevin, if I come to you first, can you tell us a bit about the work you're doing at First Bus in this area and why it's important to your business?
I think I've mentioned already that we had three conflicting business issues, really, or not conflicting, actually, three issues that we needed to address. And at the heart of it was the rigidity of how we do rostering and shift work, how we design the work. The first issue is retention. So, you know, in 21 post-COVID, 21, 22, we had attrition up to 42%. And as I said, so, you know, £8,500 to train a bus driver and a high dropout rate within 6 to 9 months because of the work patterns that we've put in place. And I'll explain that a little bit in a moment. Secondly, we have an attraction issue. We were continuing to attract people from a similar demographic and age profile. We've got a demographic issue. It's an aging workforce. It's male. And in reality, we've got about 11 or 12% frontline staff are female. So we're behind the industry average. And a major challenge. So we weren't getting women applicants. We aren't getting people that wanted to work in a flexible way. We were getting people that would fit our stereotype. And obviously that's a diminishing population. So we can't hold people and we can't really attract people that want to work differently and work with us over the long term. And then we've got the EDI issue. So again, if you put all of that together, we've also got health issues. So we've got we're doing a lot around well-being and trying to care for our workforce because we know that our absence rates are too high as well. So we've got all of those issues at play. At the heart of it, though, our people keep telling us exactly the same thing. So we do engagement surveys 3 times a year, and we've improved that from 40% to 60%. So we're doing a lot of things right, but they're becoming more confident and more assertive in telling us what they require. So if you look at how we organise work, it's done at a local level, and there are agreements with the unions at a local level. What we have done is we've allowed, as Amy has said, people to put individual requests in to get more predictable work. And we've met many of those requirements. Well, the knock-on effect for that, though, is I went to a depot recently. We had about 300 drivers, 180 had been given predictable work, and they are on a fixed line, which means that they consistently work the same rosters and shift patterns, which is great for them. However, what that then means is that everybody else, and particularly people that are joining, go on the general roster. The general roster is known in our business as the shit list, right? So let's start to think about why people call it that. Well, that's because we rotate rosters and we rotate shifts. So what that means, if you're on the general roster, you might be working lates one week, then you might be working middles, then you might be working earlies. So in terms of trying to get any kind of pattern in terms of anything outside of work, so it could be, you know, medical care, caring responsibilities, it could be looking after children, could be hobbies, could be study, could be anything, is disrupted by that work pattern. Why do we historically work that way? That's the way it's always been. That's how we align work to the requirements of the timetable. So when we started to go, we need to change this, how do you go about it? So the first thing is, you know, it's quite, you know, from a one perspective, it's quite easy to be able to articulate it. We can just go out and ask people for their preferences. And we've certainly done that in 2 or 3 depots and started to show that we can meet a lot of people's preferences in terms of the work that we can do. What that clearly does, though, it disrupts the status quo. So the people that currently have predictable work have now been disrupted because they haven't got their traditional patterns of work. So they're not happy. Trade unions that tend to represent people that have been here a long time and vested interests, I'm being very open with you, then start to say this isn't right. We don't want to unpick this. And we're going, yeah, but we got turnover. The workforce is telling us issues. We fundamentally need to change how we do this. And we need to involve all people in thinking about what works for them. So more people get a better work pattern. So that's what we've done. We've had to drive it into 3 or 4 different depots. We can see that we can give 85% of people their preferences, and if not their first choice, their second choice. So it's good news for us. We can see absence drops, health-related issues decline, and we retain people for longer that have joined us. So we can already see that we can get some of the benefits that we want. So what we've got is a system now. We've had to actually discipline and remove some of our frontline managers from this work in terms of doing our scheduling and rostering. Why? Because they are so opposed to what we're proposing that they do. You know, it's just how we've always done things in the bus industry. So we've got objections from management, frontline management, and we've got objections from trade unions. So you can start to see that it's quite easy to articulate what we need to do. It's not too difficult to start to plan it, but there are lots of vested interests and ways of working that are quite deep-seated and quite culturally specific. So we're having to unpick a lot of that. So we can see the benefits. We're starting to do more of this, and we are going to start to run out major programs. So in one of our biggest businesses, we're running a particular project where we've redesigned all the work, all the schedules and the rosters, and we're now changing every depot in that area, and that's in across the whole of Scotland, which is our biggest area. So we're trying to do a big bang in one area to again prove that we can get the preferences that work for our people, and that will have a major impact on both attrition and absence, which we can clearly cost up the cost to the business. So I think what I would say is this is not easy to do in an organization with a legacy and a culture. This is something that requires a lot of leadership. It requires the ability to convince people. You have to have a hypothesis. You have to be brave. You have to be courageous. You then have to actually do it and then get the lessons and then start to think about how do we spread this and scale this activity so we can fundamentally provide better work-life balance for the whole workforce. So I think that's that. And then I would say a little bit about the industry as a whole. I think we're an outlier. I think we're trying to do stuff that many of our businesses, our competitors will talk about. And I do think that one of the ways forward is to share best practice and how to do this with employers and employer bodies much more actively so that others start to understand that. Now, that's always difficult because I could see this as a competitive advantage. I've got a more stable workforce. I've got better retention. I've got less absence. I can run more buses. I can make more money. So why would I share that with my competitors? Now, clearly, I think government have a role to play. I'm not a great lover of legislation and telling employers what to do because we then just do workarounds and tick boxes I think we need an approach where government nudge and incentivise employers to work differently in this area. So we will make representations to the Charlie Mayfield work, and obviously when we're consulted around some of the legislative changes, we'll encourage government to think slightly differently than perhaps it currently is. And trade unions, you know, we were talking yesterday with the TUC. I think they understand that at macro level, diversity is one of the things that they champion and believe in. But the behaviour of reps at the very front of organisations doesn't often replicate the rhetoric and the principles. So there's a lot to unpick, both in management and trade unions, and a lot to go at. So I'll leave it there, but I'm sure hopefully I've stimulated a few questions and some comments.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for sharing your experiences at First Bus, and I think kind of giving some insight into why it is so complicated. And it is that balance, isn't it, between the kind of the processes and the job design versus the actual behavioural change that needs to happen on multiple levels. Thank you. I'm going to bring Nicola in. So Nicola, as you said in your introduction, you lead Timewise's work in the construction sector. Can you share some innovative working practices that you're seeing on site and the impact they're having for workers as well as employers?
Yeah, excuse me, absolutely. I wanted to share one particular employer that we've been working with, because they've taken a really team-based, proactive approach. So it's, I'm sure I can name them because although they're not here, it's Lend-Lease Construction in the UK. And what they recognised, or where this kind of work came from, was as well as the kind of more macro picture of an aging workforce and their kind of struggles to recruit and retain people and bring people into the industry, actually this came from an internal engagement survey, employee engagement survey, which really highlighted that there was a growing two-tier gap, effectively. So there was a growing gap between the flex haves and the flex have-nots. So those people who could work flexibly in terms of the ability to work from home. So those more desk-based type roles, your commercial teams, your design teams, your support-based teams, where they can work flexibly and work from home, and those teams that were working on site who cannot work from home. And flexibility had become very much associated with that ability to work from somewhere else, that ability to work from home. And so what we did is we took more of a team-based proactive approach. So we developed what we called the Flex-Able framework, which was all about really kind of creating fairness and consistency across the entire business. So it was looking at, whilst flexibility will look different in different roles, it is possible for all roles, and that as an organisation, they really wanted to take the step to say, we are a flexible employer, and this is how we will implement it. So we created this Flex-Able framework, which really identified very clearly different ways of working flexibly that were available across different projects. So it included some home-based and kind of remote working, but actually predominantly we looked at the when. So we looked at how can we detach working hours from site hours, because again, predominantly your kind of construction sites, some are 24/7, some are 6 days a week. They're certainly longer than you would like the normal working hours of work to be. They're at least kind of 12-hour days for people. So we were trying to work out, how can you better plan and schedule and split that away? So is there an opportunity here to look at different staggered start and finish times? Is there an opportunity to rethink the rotas and look at them differently? So to really be more planful in the approach of how, who needs to be on site, what skills and trades, etc., need to be on site at any one particular point in time, and therefore how can you take that approach forward? And so what we did was we upskilled, coming to your point, Kevin, about that leadership and that mindset and that behaviours piece. Having created the framework, the next thing that we did was we upskilled and kind of equipped managers with the confidence and capabilities to be able to have better conversations, to be open in the first place to having those conversations with people, and to consider really a different and more creative, innovative approach to ways of working. And then we tasked the managers to go out and work at project by project, site by site level, to work with their team to identify those preferences, what types of things are, what types of ways of working do people need. Sometimes it's just that one simple thing of, we had one site manager who I will always quote, who basically was like, just want to have dinner with my wife twice a week. By the time I've got home, like, she's gone to bed. I just want to have dinner with my wife. I don't think that was an unreasonable request from him, you know? And so it wasn't always that I want to reduce hours or I want to be working from home. Everyone just needed, it's just often that one thing that actually is going to help them, help their work-life balance, help their well-being, etc. And so what that did was then we now have project by project, site by site, there is a specific team agreement about ways of working. This is how we're going to work on this site. This is how we're going to support each other, cover for each other. This is how we're going to make sure that the site has everything it needs so the project continues, delivery is not lost, but actually everybody gets the flexibility that they need. And for some sites, it was fairly small tweaks and changes. So it might have been earlier starts or finish times. So for some people, it was just about the staggered start and finishes. And for some people, it was about a longer lunch break. So we had a few people who said, actually, I want a longer lunch break because I want to be able to go to the gym, or I want to be able to, you know, undertake my hobby or do life admin in that time. So for some people, it was just about kind of having a bit longer in terms of a lunch break. And then in others, it was they have looked at how they could do compressed hours, so but over a longer period. So for most, it was kind of having kind of 15 days in 14, so spreading it out over a 3-week period, and every 3 weeks they have that kind of rotational day off. Again, it's a rotational day off. It can't always be Friday because still things are going on a Friday. So they worked that out between them as a team. Well, which days are we going to have off, and let's ensure that everyone is the site is covered. And then on one much larger site, so it was possible because it was a large program of work, they operated a 2-team rota system. So effectively there was team A and team B. These are multi-skilled, multidisciplinary teams who were able to ensure the site was always covered. But what would happen is in week 1, team A would leave early, and in week 2, team A would stay later and come in a bit later. So they would just adjust those working patterns for the week so that they could do that. So what it's been a kind of year-long program, and what it's done, I guess, in terms of just the impact for the employers is, firstly, it's just created that fairness and consistency across the piece. So there's that recognition that there is 2 tiers. There will always be 2 different ways of working, but actually that doesn't mean that flexibility isn't available for everybody, and it doesn't mean that we can't be a flexible employer for all types of working, but it will look different. But we will apply, and our approach to flexibility is what's consistent, but the outcomes might be slightly different for everybody. And it has really created that open dialogue about flexibility. So it's also created that a better relationship, I would say, between employees and their managers around, this is what I need and want, this is how we can work together a bit more effectively. And from the employee's point of view, it's that self-reported well-being, work-life balance. They're much more motivated, and kind of those levels of job satisfaction is absolutely what we've seen improve in the last year or so.
Thank you. That's great, Nicola. Thank you. Really great examples, quite different to the one that Kevin shared in terms of approach, but exemplify again why it's really transformational change that we're talking about here. It's also worth saying that within health, we're also seeing an increased interest in and commitment to kind of team-based approaches, so self-rostering and team-based rostering for healthcare assistants and for nursing staff, and really aiming to give workers more input and the chance to state preferences in the same way that we've talked about with bus drivers and construction site workers. So we'll pop a link in the chat to a couple of examples of work in London trusts who are doing really good work in this space. I'd like to move us on, I'm just conscious of time, to consider the role of industry and sector bodies in driving change. So in our report, we say that a sector-based approach is essential for real change to take place. And as Kevin said, you know, we call on government to invest in this for some priority frontline sectors with a high proportion of lower paid, poor quality frontline roles. Of the sectors we worked with on this programme, health definitely has the most sector coordination. So flexible working's been a key part of the NHS People Promise since 2021, and it features heavily in the long-term workforce plan. So I'd like to come to you first, Hannah, to just tell us a bit about the impact that cross-sector approach is having within health, and maybe share some examples of what's really working well to drive change.
Yeah, of course. So NHS employees, we are in a really privileged position to work with individual trusts and providers, but we also work quite collaboratively with other sector bodies as well. So for example, NHS England, Department for Health and Social Care, and that's not just with flexible working, that is across all elements within the people promise. And like you said, Amy, the NHS has really clear aims for flexible working that have been outlined in the long-term workforce plan most recently, and the people promise, like you say, it's been in inception since 2021, and all trusts and providers are well versed in those. They provide an expectation of employers to be working towards or already implementing the asks. And in terms of cross-sector working, it gives us an aligned goal to support employers with the implementation in an ever-changing landscape, which is healthcare. So the other element that was really beneficial for us is that we have the NHS staff survey, which I know other panelists have spoken about how we collect that data. So the NHS staff survey happens once a year. It's the biggest evaluation that we do. There is also the quarterly People Pulse evaluations, which happen within individual trusts, and they can be slightly tailored, but the staff survey is the big one. And it provides really clear evaluation of how staff feel in relation to flexible working, as well as other aspects of their role. And something that the data really shows us is that staff members' relationships with their line managers have a massive impact on their confidence around flexible working, as well as other workforce issues like has been mentioned in terms of health and wellbeing and EDI and things like that. So with this in mind, we take a really collaborative approach to flexible working and how it can be, how we can support improved health and wellbeing, as well as drive compassionate leadership to create an improved workplace culture. So we really look at it from a cultural perspective and how we can support employers with that to help improve staff experience overall. And as you can imagine, and it's been mentioned in the other industries as well, retention is a massive challenge within the NHS, but flexible working is a way to support retention, and it is a fundamental part of the workplace. It's not a reward, it is something that we have from the day one right, which we were really, NHS was really forward thinking in that. So, for example, we know that some trusts have been doing a huge amount of work to look at how jobs are designed in both clinical and non-clinical roles in relation to flexible working and implementing sort of flexible working conversations from the induction of a new starter. It's really about creating that openness of the culture, making sure people feel safe to have these conversations, with that be their line manager or team leaders, things like that. And creating that environment where regular flexible working conversations is the norm has been a huge enabler for change. And with that as well, we make the connections to things like health and wellbeing conversations. And again, it's not looking at things in silo, it's looking at how we can make those collaborative approaches, which we really encourage and support employers to do. And we're hearing that feedback, and we know that is happening and has been a huge driver for change. One of the biggest drivers is the ability for us to provide space and resources to support employers with the aim of improving workplace cultures to embrace flexible working and ultimately provide a better staff experience. So we have our networks and we have resources that we share good practice, we share things when they go wrong as well, because there's so much learning in that, and we are part of the people promise is to create a just and learn culture. We don't have a blame culture, we are there to the NHS is, we do things, we look at the learning and we see how things can be improved. So like I say, the NHS was leading in making flexible working a day one right. And when the terms and conditions were updated in 2021, we worked really closely with employers to ensure that they had the resources they needed to practically make this a reality for their workforce. It's really important that our line managers in particular who take on the brunt a lot of this work, not just leaders, have the resources available, and we're not expecting them to be experts in everything. Goodness, they've got an incredibly tough job, so we do need to make sure that the support is there, and we do really continue to be reactive to the feedback that we receive on our resources and as legislation changes, things like that. So we're really proactive in that space. So most recently we created a flexible working poster, which was originally a poster, but it's now turned into a template as well. So trusts and providers can go in there, they can update it and change it with their flexible working contact information. They can change it so that it's appropriate for different workforces, so clinical, non-clinical, individual teams, about what is potentially possible. Because I think some of the feedback that we've had is that people know what flexible working is and they understand sort of the process of how to get it, but they don't know necessarily what flexible working can look like. Sometimes there is that assumption that it's a 9-day fortnight, or that it's like some of the other suggestions have been today, sort of like finishing a little bit early, starting later, but there's a lot of different options. So we've also worked really collaboratively with NHS Staff Council, Timewise and NHS England to provide guides as well as resources such as our flexible working scenarios, which I know there's a link to those in the chat. I'd really recommend those. They've been incredibly popular. They cover a really wide range of complex flexible working cases to support leaders and line managers. And we often refer back to those, and we've even used them as a bit like a working group situations in our flexible working network to say, okay, so let's look at this, let's unpick it together. It's about, I think that sort of togetherness is a huge enabler to improving flexible working realities within trusts and providers. And as a cross-sector body, that's a really privilege that we have to be able to sit down and have that time, because obviously people are incredibly busy, and time itself is a barrier to making this happen. So the flexible working space within my role in the staff experience programme of work, we really look at the culture within the workplace and ways to support retention, which in turn also delivers the best patient care. You can't have good patient care and poor staff experience. The two don't go hand in hand. You have to look at both together. And obviously patient care is a huge outcome for the NHS. So we really focus on staff experience there to ensure that that is a reality. And we really encourage our networks to be bold and to try something new that works for them and their workforce. And like I said, we share that good practice and learning in our resources, whether that's sort of like things on our website. We hold webinars, lots of different ways that we can connect with employers and share that, and it's always been really, really valuable. And so, for example, we're aware of sort of pilots that are being implemented across different trusts, and not necessarily in some ways the motivation for the pilot wasn't necessarily to improve staff experience, it was actually to improve patient outcomes and meeting targets. But the way they've done that is through flexible working, which ultimately has that improvement of people's health and well-being, their work-life balance. They're able to, you know, go and do their hobbies, things like that, and then also be the person they need to be in work. So it's been really beneficial. And those pilots of those snippets of pilots have been really, really positive. And then obviously people are able to pinch with pride and sort of roll those out in their own ways. We know that employers want to get it right for their staff now more than ever, and a culture that embraces a positive staff experience is how this can be made a reality, and flexible working is a huge driver for this. So our network and conference evaluations tell us that this cross-sector working is invaluable to support workforce leaders and enables change, as well as giving space for employers to connect and learn from their peers that wouldn't always be as accessible to them. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm really struck, as you say, it is a slightly different sectoral view in health, but I'm really struck by, you know, much of what you say, which translates across sectors. So the importance of that line management relationship, the need to support, you know, the need for sector bodies to support employers, because actually this takes time and effort, and these are very pressured frontline roles. And those sort of practical resources and examples, and yeah, Steal with Pride, I think is
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I guess the setting is slightly different. There isn't necessarily always that competitive advantage that Kevin talked about, which might be there in other sectors. So it's about how can we find a way to get beyond that as a barrier in other places, because clearly that is super valuable within health. Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences. As we mentioned, or many of you mentioned in your introductions earlier, another distinction between the sectors we're looking at today is the kind of demographic makeup. So in the NHS workforce, we're looking at around 3/4 of the workforce being women, whereas obviously that's, you know, 26% in transport and 16% in construction. Dal, if I can come to you to think about this a bit more. So your organisation focuses on enabling women in roles across transport to maximise their potential. How can sector bodies influence workplace practice in your industry, and why is this important?
Thank you, Amy. So great information given by all the kind of speakers today, and lots of it resonates with what women in transport encounter when talking to women that are part of Women in Transport and our members. So a lot of it for us is about using women's voices and sharing their stories and their aspirations, and really working with the industry to have women's voices heard within the innovation, within the work plans, within all of the day-to-day business women need to feature within. and their requirements need to be heard. So it is a platform for women to share experiences, for women within the industry to help position the industry to attract new women coming into the industry and underrepresented groups as well. So a lot of the kind of, I suppose, negative experiences that women face when, particularly frontline, when it's the shift patterns are, it might be a 12-hour shift, and it might be that they end up in areas where it's unsafe. And so safety and security becomes a big prominent feature within whether it's an attractive profession to go into. So there are things like that may not always be at the forefront of management and of organisations when they're looking at shift patterns as well. Safety is a completely really important feature for women in transport, and they will share their stories, and they will tell you and cite examples where just because of the shift pattern they were on and the unsociable hours, where that has negatively impacted their perception and they've left the sector. All of that good stuff about an aging population, so that's key. So it's known particularly within the bus sector, that the average age is over 50. So in a few years' time, we're going to have a real big problem in terms of retention and attraction if we don't do something to attract different and diverse communities to apply for roles within the front line of transport sector. And so again, it's about longevity, it's about that future planning and that future thinking. And much of the perceptions around shift patterns and flexibility, a lot of it is about terminology as well. So using things like the words part-time, it's quite archaic, it's negative kind of language. Whereas if you use things like flexible working, and I love the term flex-able working, which I might steal from Nicola and start using some of that. All of that implies that flexible it's a more positive experience. So there's things that the industry can do to help themselves in terms of how they position these roles as well, and that outward perception of the role. So hearing women's voices helps set those perceptions and correct some of that perception as well. So it involves them within that kind of talent pool and retention. Where women in transport have been able to actually make a difference are holding things like round tables, where they're sharing best practice, where they're sharing women's stories, and so that it becomes top of the agenda to help change and understand the problem. So a lot of it is about, do we fully appreciate the problem that we're all trying to fix? And only by listening to experiences of lived experiences do we really truly understand and come to a solution that will work and not just create other problems further down the line. Women in Transport are part of an all-parliamentary group where we are able to lobby politicians and look at helping with policy and strategy and bringing all of these points to the fore so that they're all considered when policies are being drafted, and just that kind of industry outlook is appreciated. The kind of things that we've been involved in. So we at the moment, the Equity Index is a survey that's live for the second time running, so the second consecutive year. So that's live at the moment, and where we look for organisations to kind of talk about their gender pay gap, and that in itself is a barrier as well in terms of attracting women to the industry. But getting organisations to be honest about their gender pay gap and how their organisations are progressing towards parity. So we can help in things like that. And we've also looked at an inclusive employment journey, and that sits now on the CPT's website, where we've created a guide particularly for sort of smaller operators, to look at how do they go about recruiting women into their industry, the language they use, the application process, all of those things that will be helpful guides. We've also worked with the D&I bus group, looking at an inclusive cab design. So looking at, when we do recruit women and they are driving, what makes it more inclusive in terms of the cab that they sit in, effectively their office for the day, the positioning of the seat, the mirrors, how are we making them feel like they're welcome in that space? And flexible working goes very much into that same space. How do we make women feel that they're welcome in that space and that their needs are considered? It's important that people feel welcome and people feel like they belong and they're motivated to stay, and it all feeds back then into that kind of longevity, retention and attraction. It's all very key to make people feel good about the roles that they do. Again, intergenerational workforces. So with the aging population, to attract a younger population, what their needs and their requirements are going to be different. As younger people come in, their work-life balances are different. And an older population, looking at people that are reaching retirement age and they're not quite ready to retire yet, but they do want to reduce the number of hours that they're working and the types of shifts that they're working. How do we keep that intergenerational workforce gainfully employed within a sector that needs their talent and needs them to part of Bus particularly is around the actual product that's delivered is the service, it's taking people places, it's connecting communities. If the workforce is motivated and happy, that then reflects on customers and the perceptions of the industry. And at the end of the day, for all commercial organizations, it's the product and that kind of perception of the product that will make you successful or not. And I think at the heart of it, that's what it is. Transport is about connecting people with places, and the people that do that are the front line, the people that are visible, the people that are turning up 24/7 and operating all of these shifts. And I think that's key in terms of making those people happy in the work that they're doing. Is more than just the money that they're earning. It's that work-life balance, the ability to do other things with their lives, and the caring responsibilities that everybody has, and just making that whole value chain key to the delivery. And in boardrooms, and I've been in boardrooms where decisions are made on kind of a financial basis, what does that do to the bottom line? But if we're not looking after the product that we're delivering and making sure that the workforce that we employ to deliver that product is a happy workforce, and that's reflected in the customer base that we attract, we're not going to gain kind of increased patronage, which is again another battle for the industry right now, is that patronage post-COVID hasn't really come back. So all of these things help, and I think that the sector bodies like Women in Transport are all useful in terms of highlighting these experiences without any bias, without any kind of hidden agenda. It's all about making transport a better place for everybody, not just for the kind of high percentage of men that work within transport right now.
Yeah, thank you, Dal. It's fascinating to hear about the work you're doing and the change you're driving. And actually it was really good. I've just been answering a question in the Q&A about SMEs. So it was really good, your point about providing support on a sector level for smaller operators who maybe don't have the capacity or the capability internally to do some of this. Thank you all. It's been a fascinating conversation this morning. As ever, we are a bit short of time. We've answered many of the questions on the Q&A, but if we haven't got to yours, do get in touch with us if you want to pick that up separately. What I'd like to do just before we close is come to each of the panel for a final thought. So we've got many people in the audience today from a range of sectors with an interest in making UK workplaces more equitable and inclusive. Very briefly for each of you, what one thing would you prioritise to progress this agenda? So Kevin, if I come to you first.
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? One thing. I think it's, and I think this is most probably predominantly a leadership issue. If you're going to, so I think there is why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve? And being absolutely explicit about that. So for us, it's very clearly about, the service provision. you know, making sure that we're providing a good service to our our customers. And to do that, we need drivers to do, you know, if you need bus drivers, then, you know, with an aging population and the demographic change in our labour market, we need to be better at attraction and retaining people. How do we do that? Well, we need to listen to our workforce. If you listen to our workforce, it's about work-life balance and being able to do things as well as work. So I think you have to go back to that big question, which is, if you are going to provide a great service and be a really profitable, competitive business, you need to listen to your workforce and then provide work which is meeting their requirements. If you do that, you'll improve absence, you'll improve attrition. And if you're doing those things, then you'll be able to meet your own business requirements. So it takes some bravery, I think, to link up the real hard financial performance of the business with some aspirations from your workforce, and then really unpicking the way you've done it before. So I think there's a clear agenda about doing stuff which is different to what you've done before.
Great. So that bravery around leadership. Thank you. Hannah, I'll come to you.
I think that's about its cultural changes and using your data to really drive those changes to make these things happen. But also it takes time. So don't be disheartened that these things, you know, don't happen overnight, but be kind to yourselves and equip your managers and your teams with the resources they need.
Yeah, thank you. And that was really clear in your examples. So great work happening there within health. Dal?
I think it's about sharing best practice. There's lots of great stuff going on, and things like this help share that best practice. And I think, and not being afraid to learn from that, and other organisations taking the positives, learning the lessons, avoiding the pitfalls, but to share best practice. It isn't about, it would be a zero-sum game otherwise if everyone is like just focused on their own business. And you know, back to Kevin's point about competitive advantage, I think it's that wider look for the betterment of the sector as opposed to just the individuals within the sector. So
yeah, great, thank you. And Nicola?
Final point I'll say is kind of just, let's not do what we've always done. I think what we need is mindset change. I think we need bravery and courage, as others have suggested, and I think we need to be creative and think differently. And don't be afraid to use the evidence to have those conversations with your leaders and managers.
Thank you. Huge thanks to all of you, to Daljit, Nicola, Hannah and Kevin for joining us today, sharing your thoughts and insights. And again, thanks to our funder, the Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust, who have made the programme of work that we've been talking about possible. And thank you to everyone in the audience for coming today. I hope you can take a few minutes now to sort of reflect on what you've heard and think about what action you can take to make work more flexible and secure for your workforce. Do read the report and sector guides. The links are in the chat. We'd love to hear what you think when you read them, and we hope you find them useful for your own practice. You will be diverted to a short survey to complete when you close the Zoom meeting. This will take just a minute or two maximum and is really helpful for us as a social business to be able to track the impact of events like these and work on future ones. So thanks very much for coming, and thanks again to the panel for this morning. Have a good rest of the day.